Hello. So I wanted to do a video kind of going over some of the stuff that I've posted about recently to provide some more clarity for um, what exactly I'm talking about. So we're going to do a live on equine cognition and how it functions. And what I actually mean when I'm saying horses can't be deceptive or plot things and why they think the way that they do. Um, and the reason I wanted to do this is because I find a lot of people view people saying that horses can't think the same as people as like a statement against their intelligence. And one thing that I think is super important for us to consider is that intelligence in animals doesn't have to look like how it does in humans in order for those animals to be intelligent. We have this narrative that intelligence is based off of like human standards of how we think, when animals can be intelligent in their own way without having human traits be the driving reason behind their intelligence. So I wanted to talk about that because I think it's important for people to understand that intelligence still exists in multiple different species, even if they don't have the same capacity to think like people. Um, and I also wanted to clarify a little bit further why I think it is so important for us to not mislabel horse behavior until there's actually like hard evidence that their ability to think the way that they do is actually true. Because a lot of people think that horses can be deliberately deceptive. Like I've seen people say like, oh, my horse fakes being lame, or they do these naughty things on purpose just to defy me and just to get out of riding. And that mindset is really dangerous towards horses because it puts them at risk of getting punished for things that they are not doing intentionally, or it means that people are going to just ride them through physical lameness. And that is really bad because well-intentioned people, if they're under the belief that their horse is faking a lameness, that and then they push them to continue working because of that, they could end up making the lameness worse. And I think it's also really important for people to consider the fact that intermittent lameness is a thing. So your horse could be lame at the start of the ride, and if you continue to push them through it, maybe they warm up their muscles enough that whatever is bothering them no longer feels as sore, or they kind of just mask it as time goes on and they have enough adrenaline and stress pumping that they no longer feel the reason why they're lame. So that's a common theme that I see a lot of people say, that like their horse fakes being lame because they're lame some days and not others, or they'll be lame at the start of their ride, but then like if they lunge them first and kind of push them through it, they stop being lame. Um, and it's just a really dangerous thought process. And the reason why I wanted to go more in depth on explaining this is that something that's really important to consider about horses that is like vastly different from the way we think is the fact that they're flight animals. And their being flight animals means that the act of portraying themselves as being weak or hurt or compromised in some capacity, the act of doing that puts them at massive risk of being picked off by a predator. So it's not a trait that a flight animal would engage in because it's an inherently unsafe trait to do. There's no benefit to them to pretending to be lame when at its core, the way that they've developed and evolved as a species, that would be like basically guaranteed death. If anything, from what we have learned from studying horses, they actually um, they actually mask their physical discomfort because that is it's like a life-saving measure for a flight animal, because a predator is going to go after the weakest member of the herd, whoever looks the easiest to catch. So horses mask their discomfort and any physical discomfort, and they mask pain for that reason, because if they're in pain and they're compromised and they clearly like are sore, a predator is going to look at that animal and go, that's the one I'm going to go after, because they're not going to be able to run away as well. So the entire notion that they fake being lame for the purpose of trying to get out of rides is a really problematic one, because they're not faking it. They actually are lame. It's not deceitful. It's not an intent to try to like deceive their rider and get out of something. And then now, like outside of the whole lameness thing, I wanted to talk about also. Sorry, just one second. I'm just sharing this on my Facebook. Um, I also wanted to talk about like other ways of deceit that people think horses participate in, because cognitively, something that I think is important that's not talked about enough, like outside of discussing what we know of horses' actual thinking capacity, the idea that they can deliberately try to do something naughty for the purpose of pissing off their rider implies that they know the difference between right and wrong, which is a very like abstract concept that animals don't have, and like even young human children don't have, which is why you have to monitor them more closely because they tend to respond impulsively. So the idea that they can be naughty on purpose implies that they know the difference between right and wrong, which would require them to know our exact expectations and also know like what exactly like we want them to do in any given moment, and then choose to be bad and know that what they're doing is bad and do it anyways. And that isn't a reasonable thing to expect them to know because their behavioral repertoire is so different than ours. Like human beings, even culturally, like cultural expectations and the way certain humans think differs from place to place. Like people in Western society are going to have different value systems and different beliefs than people across the world in different cultures. So expecting an animal that has no part in our way of thinking and is not a predator to think similarly to us and deliberately do things for the purpose of being deceitful and deceptive is really problematic. And then like the other part of this that I want to say is that even if we're going to pretend that they can, um I think another thing that's really important is the fact that, like, if we think horses can be deliberately deceptive, then the question should be why are they going through all of these hoops just to get out of ridden work with people? Why is that so aversive to them that they would act out behaviors for the sole purpose of evading training? Because even if that is true, what it says about what we are asking them to do is not a good thing. So, regardless of the reasoning for this and any logic scientifically, like I'm going to go into about their cognition on a specific basis after this, but regardless of what people want to believe, the idea that horses intentionally do things for the purpose of getting out of interacting with people or getting out of work implies that they don't want to be working in the first place. To which our response should be, what about what I'm asking this animal to do is so bad that they would deliberately try to get out of it? Because that is a sign that something's not working regardless, even if we're going to believe that they can think that way, which they can. Now, I want to go into cognitively like the differences in how predators think versus prey animals and why. Human beings are predators, so and also we're like the most intelligent species on earth, even if we do dumb shit regardless. But human beings are predators. So for a predator, the ability to plan out tasks and like plot per se is important and useful for hunting and gathering food that way. So if your primary means of feeding yourself is hunting creatures that are going to try to evade you and get away, being able to plan how you're going to go about doing that and be crafty in that regard is useful for a predator because they're hunting live prey. Whereas for a flight animal, they are being hunted and they are generally herbivores and they are going to be just eating grasses and different types of plants and wandering around for that. So their primary safety mechanism is fleeing from whatever is the perceived danger, right? So in order to do that, it's actually beneficial to the most intelligent thing that they can do is existing in the moment. Because like anyone who reflects on the past or thinks about the future or daydreams in any capacity can attest to the fact that when your brain is out of the present and you're not taking in the surroundings around you and you're thinking about something else, you're compromised in your ability to notice something in the general environment because you're not paying as much attention. So for a flight animal, removing themselves from the present to reflect on the past or the future is actually not of benefit to them because it puts them at risk of being preyed on because they're no longer thinking about their surroundings and what's around them. So for horses, literally, the most intelligent thing they can do is existing in the moment. And thinking about their surroundings, noticing their surroundings, noticing everything, listening to all the sights and listening to all the sounds that they hear, seeing all the sights, smelling all the smells, and just being hyper aware of what is going on in their general environment. That is literally the most intelligent thing they can do to keep themselves safe, because the more focused you are on the present, the more able you are to notice changes in the environment. And this is also why they tend to notice things from way far away and notice things really far in advance compared to what a person can notice. We're not as hyper vigilant as a species because we don't have to be. We don't have to be worried about being preyed on by other creatures, generally speaking. It's not at the forefront of our concerns. So we can just go walking around in the environment and going about our day and not having to care about so many different factors and be fearful to the extent that a flight animal has to be, because we have evolved to not have to worry about those things. And yeah, like someone on YouTube said, that's why they can see like the field of vision that they have. So horses have a different field of vision than us because they're flight animals. Flight animals generally have eyes on the sides of their head. Predators have their eyes facing forward because this is better for hunting, but having your eyes on the sides of the head means that you have a way bigger field of vision. So someone on Instagram asked, I understand the MO of horses to stay in the present. Could you speak to their ability to incorporate past experiences into that present survival mindset? Yes. So horses have a great memory, and I think this is where people tend to get confused with their ability to plot things and like how they think. Horses have fantastic memories. They will remember things for years and years and years and years. But the important thing to note about their memory is that in order for that past experience to be triggered, there has to be a relevant stimuli in the present to trigger it. So for example, if they enter an arena and every time they enter that arena, they're very stressed and someone is being harsh to them and it's unpleasant and scary, then they're going to start to learn to generalize all arenas or even the processes of being tacked up and led to an arena and whatever tends to come before that work. They're going to generalize all of that as predicting a stressful experience. So then they can predict what might happen next because of past experiences. And they're having these past memories be triggered by present stimuli. So for example, if they've had a bad experience, let's say you took them on a trail ride and something jumped out of the bushes and really scared them. They then might start to generalize all bushes as feeling like potentially unsafe. And they're going to be way more careful and evasive of those types of surroundings. And again, for a flight animal, having a good memory and knowing what to avoid, like what makes you feel unsafe and when you should avoid that, is of an evolutionary benefit. So if they learn that in certain scenarios they feel less safe, they're going to avoid those scenarios. Similarly, with stuff like when they throw riders, because this is also where people say that horses plot things. So I'm going to explain the process of that because it's actually just like a learned behavior. So, for example, if a horse is really stressed during a ride and the rider is the primary cause of their stress, be it because the rider's causing them pain, the rider's pushing them to do things that they find stressful and they feel inherently in danger. It doesn't mean that their life actually has to be in danger. They feel like they are in danger, right? So if the person is the cause of that and then they engage in a flight behavior that then results in the person getting tossed off, they have effectively removed the source of their stress. Because if the person was being the primary source of their stress, by throwing them off, that stress is suddenly relieved and they get a moment of reprieve. So then they can then learn that is a useful means of relieving their stress. And then they can repeat that behavior over and over again because it worked last time. But that's not like a plot. It's a learned behavior in that they did something that worked. It resulted in a reduction of stress and it alleviated the cause of their stress, even if just momentarily. So then they're more likely to repeat it again. So this is where you get horses that learn that like throwing their heads down, like especially with little riders, throwing their heads down can cause little people to go over their heads, and then it alleviates the source of their stress or discomfort. And then they're going to do that again because it was reinforcing in that it removed their source of stress. So they learn these things because they're constantly trying to evade discomfort of any sort. Being uncomfortable, feeling in fear, feeling in pain, feeling stressed in any capacity, These are all things that the horse doesn't want to feel. They want to get back to equilibrium and feel safe in their environment. So if they learn that specific behaviors result in safety or a reduction in stress and therefore feeling a little bit safer, even if they don't feel completely safe, they're going to repeat those behaviors again and again and again. And then also the other thing to consider is that a lot of the behaviors that we see in horses under saddle can also be a direct response to certain stimuli. So, for example, Milo used to throw his head down and buck right after fences a lot. The reason for that, I would infer now that I know more, would be that his feet were sore. So when he landed, all of the pressure was going on his sore front feet. And because of how bad the angles of his feet were and because of how thin his soles were, there was a pain response that he was then responding to by bucking after the fences. So it was a direct response to a stimuli that was only applied in that specific situation because he repeated that behavior even if it didn't really result in any real change. And even if he got punished for it, it was a response to discomfort that he repeatedly did because of that. It wasn't a plot to try to do anything to me. It was a response to discomfort. And a lot of the behaviors that we see in horses are like that. I also had some people bring up that their horses know that they can only do things when they leave the area, and that therefore that is a plot. So I also wanted to talk about that because that's another example of a learned behavior. If a horse is trying to like reach and grab their blankets or something outside of their stall door or opening their stall door, and every time there's a person in the general vicinity, they are yelled at or told to stop or have someone run up to them and shoo them away from that, effectively punishing them from doing that behavior. But when there's no people in the barn, they can engage in that behavior without anyone punishing them. They will learn when they can and can't do that behavior off of trial and error. So if they learn if this person is far enough away, there's enough of a gap before they can stop me from doing this thing and I can get away with it. If they find the behavior that they're doing reinforcing enough, they're going to try to do it in situations that they have previously learned that it works in. Um, and you see these same things with like horses that learn how to like escape from their enclosures. So for example, a horse that learns that when the rider is opening the gate, if they scoot through just fast enough that they can get loose and then they go and find a patch of grass, that's highly reinforcing. And they're going to learn that when they hear specific stimuli, like the sound of the gate opening, a person approaching the field, and all of these different variables that people really don't consider because there's usually a lot of different tells. They'll then learn that that is like the key moment that they can get away with doing this behavior that has been so highly reinforcing. So it's not that they're plotting it, but it's that they've learned the process of what we're doing and when they can get away with it. And other things to consider that people don't really consider because we're not usually as aware as horses are is that like they notice subtle changes in body language. They notice expressions on our faces. They notice different smells. So for example, if you smell like an antiseptic because you're going to clean a wound, they're going to smell that and they're going to try to avoid you in specific because they know that that might predict you doing something that they find uncomfortable. There's been studies that have shown that horses can read human facial expressions. So if they know someone that looks angry or upset or more stressed and your body language has changed, regardless of whether you're consciously aware of that change, your horse is going to notice that. And they're going to apply that um, learned like that learned behavior from like knowing that what certain human emotions or facial expressions predict certain outcomes, and they're going to avoid or approach it accordingly depending on whether or not it's good or bad. So they're very adept at learning how to respond to their environment, but I think the really important thing for people to realize is that they're responding to stimuli in the present. And like one thing that really bothers me about this whole discussion is that people say that that's saying horses are unintelligent or that they're stupid or that like I only hang out with stupid horses then if I believe that. But no, they're not stupid. And I think that one of the biggest problems people have is the belief that in order for animals to be intelligent, they have to portray human traits in their line of thinking. Intelligence isn't structured by how human a creature is able to think. Like we cannot measure intelligence off of their ability to engage in humanistic behaviors because they are not humans. There's other forms of intelligence, and when you look at their core how their species has developed and what they have had to survive in order to develop, I think that that's the really important thing to note is intelligence is that like their ability to evolve with the environment. Like for example, horses who learn how to avoid unpleasant things and continue to engage in behaviors that the people do not want because they're so loud about how much they don't like something. I personally think that's a sign of massive intelligence to just like very clearly display their discomfort with specific situations, regardless of the punishment it might result in, because they're repeatedly trying to be like, hey, this makes me uncomfortable. And they're repeatedly trying to relieve the internal stress that they're feeling with external behaviors. And I think that's a sign of intelligence. A lot of the most intelligent horses that we work with give people the most trouble. And yet people often label these as stupid horses because we label intelligence off of obedience, the like how well a horse is willing to obey what we ask it to do and how easy it is for us to make them do what we want them to do. That is how we measure intelligence, and that is inherently unfair to them as animals, because intelligence doesn't have to be their ability to comply with tasks that we ask them or their ability to behave like a human. It's a different concept with every animal. And since horses are flight animals, there's a lot of differences in how they perceive the world and how they think that make them very different than us. So we have to work an awful lot harder to try to consider their way of perceiving the world in order to actually benefit them in training and be the most considerate of them. And something that I think is really, really important with like not labeling them as being able to do things on purpose to piss people off is that that line of thinking, whether or not you are guilty of it yourself or not, is so commonly used to justify high levels of punishment because it's followed by the belief that the horse knows right from wrong and is choosing to do wrong anyways, and therefore is being a bad horse that deserves to be punished. And that is a very problematic mindset that results in a lot of mistreatment. So on the flip side, giving them the benefit of the doubt and assuming that they're acting to something in the moment and that they're uncomfortable, they're stressed, or they're whatever, giving them the benefit of the doubt there doesn't result in the same level of mistreatment to them. So until there's actually hard evidence that suggests that they have the ability to plot and be intentionally deceptive, it is not fair to horses to perpetuate that just off of how we feel. Because I think something that's also really important is that we experience the world off of our individual experiences and we project that learned knowledge into the environment that we live in. So if we've been taught to believe that horses are doing things to be deceptive, that is the way and the lens that we're going to see them in, because that's the way that I used to see them in. And then when you start to learn different ways of looking at it, it can really massively change the way that you perceive it. But if you don't understand like how horses are intrinsically motivated and how their brain functions and how they respond as flight animals, then you're going to look at it through a much different lens than if you learn about those things. And it's really important to do that because the way we should be looking at horse behavior is based off of how horses are likely to think, not based off of how we as people think that they think. And a lot of the anecdotal opinions that we see are rooted in how people perceive horse behaviors rather than how the horse is likely perceiving the world. And there is a key difference there. So it's important to try to put yourself in the lens of being a flight animal and consider how they are likely perceiving the world. Because the other thing to consider too is that horses have a very large amygdala, which is the part of your brain that responds to danger and just like reacts. Um, they have a larger amygdala because reacting to threats and moving immediately is of the utmost importance for a flight animal, because if they had a delayed response to threat, then they could die. So what this means is that a lot of times when horses are really stressed and something scary happens and they feel in danger, the stress response and the subsequent flight response can actually bypass the thinking part of their brain and result in them just moving away from the threat, because it's kind of the same thing as if you touch a hot frying pan. Before your brain even really has a chance to register the thought that you're getting burnt, you jump back with your hand. And it's like an innate immediate response. Or similarly, if someone scares you, you'll jump without consciously registering like the full scope of the threat and going, oh, that's just so and so that's trying to scare me. Your body responds before your brain has the full opportunity to unpack why it's responding. So a lot of the flight behaviors that we see in horses where they react suddenly are the result of that happening, where they're not consciously interpreting the threat, which is where you can get horses that leap to the side really fast and move quickly to get away from something, and then they stop and they start to like completely take in what they were spooking at, and then they might be okay with it after because they're realizing, oh, it's just that. And when you have horses who are in chronic states of stress, where they are in a state of hypervigilance all the time because of a multitude of different factors, and they're already like have a baseline higher level of stress, they're more likely to react in fear to certain stimuli that they otherwise might tune out. And it's the same with people. If you're a highly anxious person who's really stressed and at a high level of anxiety and you're in a state of hypervigilance, you're more likely to be reactive than someone who is really calm, because you're in fight or flight mode constantly. So anxious people are more likely to jump at specific noises and things that might not otherwise bother other people, because their body is in a state of hypervigilance and is ready to respond and flee from danger at the drop of a hat. So these are all learned, like these are all learned behaviors that are like the result of like how you're feeling internally from like the emotional response from anxiety and stress, and then also based off of how we think differently as animals. So I think that it's really important for people to start to view things through the lens of like, animals do not have to think the way we do in order to be intelligent, because like there's a lot of stupid things that humans do and believe that like as the most intelligent species you'd think we wouldn't, but we do anyways. And there's a lot of things that animals do that are far more intelligent than what we do. Like for a good example of people's lack of intelligence would be the fact that we're one of the few species of animals that's like actively destroying the environment that we need to live in, and doing it knowingly with the knowledge of what we're doing and knowing the potential outcomes of that. And we keep doing it because of the level of greed that people feel for like getting money and capital resources. And this is something we do knowingly. So that would be viewed as stupid probably to a lot of animals, because you don't see like animals committing arson and effectively lighting lighting resources on fire that they need to survive. So there's a lot of instances where I think animals are smarter and more in touch with like their innate desires than people are. And I think that we do all animals a disservice when we try to measure their intelligence through the lens of how human like they are, because you can be intelligent without being a person. And flight animals' level of intelligence and their type of reactivity is like the most intelligent thing that they can do. So um, I think that something is really important with horses in specific is just to keep in mind that as flight animals, they're not going to fake being physically compromised at all, because that's how they die. Like that is quite literally, like, to them it feels like death. To just fake being physically compromised is basically like wearing a neon sign saying, yay, come eat me. They're not going to do that. The reason why we see intermittent lameness is because horses can have soreness that is intermittent, and they might be lame one day and not the other, or they might start to mask it when their adrenaline goes up enough that they stop feeling the pain. Like when you're at a really high level of adrenaline, you can hurt yourself and you could not feel the pain until your stress response goes down and you relax, and then suddenly you'll be like, oh my god, my knee really hurts, or oh my god, I've cut myself and I didn't even realize. So that can happen with horses. If riding is inherently stressful and their stress response is rising as they are riding, and especially in response to pain, then the pain can be overtaken by that adrenaline response where they don't feel it as much. And it does not mean that they are faking it. It means that their body is responding to internal triggers accordingly. The other thing that is important is that, like, not being able to find a source of pain does not mean it's not there. A lot of people's diagnostics just involve like flexion tests, or like if they do like imaging, it's usually just x-ray or ultrasound, but there are things that you cannot catch without an MRI or a CT, which most horse owners will not do because of how expensive they are. And even then, there's a chance that you might not catch the source of pain. And I think all humans can attest to the fact that a doctor being unable to find the exact source of your illness or your pain does not mean that you don't have it and that you don't feel bad. There's lots of things that people can feel, and even being able to articulate their symptoms and what they're feeling, they still can't get a proper diagnosis for it. So the same applies to horses, and it's also even more difficult because as a species, they tend to mask their discomfort. So it can be really hard to narrow down the source of pain. So this is really important. And like, honestly, a lot of the unwanted behaviors we see in horses are stress and pain related. I know people get frustrated. They're like, oh, not everything is about that, but it is, because they're flight animals. Like, the flight response in times of fear or uncertainty is going to be their most innate trialed response. And we really need to take note of that and be really conscious of how they think if we want to do best by them, because they're not predators. If we want an animal that thinks more similarly to the way we do, then it's like, get a predator. But like, we chose to work with flight animals, and we need to view them through the lens of being a flight animal rather than looking at it through a humanistic lens and projecting our ideals onto them, because horses aren't out to get us. And also, if you enter any training session with the mindset that the horse is your adversary and that they're out to get you and that they're out to do things just to bother you and piss you off, it's going to alter your response and make you much more aggressive if that's the lens that you're looking at it through. So that's also why it's really dangerous to encourage that type of behavior, because it does enable a lot of mistreatment towards horses. And understanding them better means that you can kind of pause and give them the benefit of the doubt more, because you're not going to take it to like from a such a frustrated perspective. So anyways, that is kind of my little deep dive on horse cognition and like what we know of it. Because yeah, the last thing I want to say is that a lot of people are like, oh, science isn't always right. And like, this is true, but the reason why science isn't always right is because the opinion of science changes as new information arises, and it's willing to change its opinion when it's disproven or when the thought has expanded and they now know more. Whereas anecdotes and personal biases that humans hold tend to stick and remain regardless of how much proof there is that they're wrong. And that therein lies the difference between science and like our personal biases. Science is the pursuit of fact and the continued study of what is the most likely reality of whatever we're studying. And that is why it's willing to change its perspective when it is wrong. So in my opinion, if there's this distrust in science because it changes its opinion, there should be 2 to 3 times minimum the level of distrust to someone who maintains their opinion despite the lack of evidence, simply because it's the way they feel about something, because that's a sign that even with evidence to the contrary, they're not willing to change their perspective. Whereas on the flip side, science does change the perspective when new information comes out. But if you have an opinion that you strongly believe emotionally and that you're really emotionally attached to, and you maintain that opinion despite empirical evidence that suggests that the opposite is true, then what you're doing is doubling down on a belief system that has no evidence simply because of how you personally feel, which is the least able to be relied on. Feeling like that you can't rely on that, because it's all off of emotion and how you want to feel about things. And we also want to feel comfortable. So if information makes us feel uncomfortable, we're very likely to look for confirmation bias and deny the reality of the situation if it makes us uncomfortable. And we're going to seek out information that makes us feel most comfortable. So it's really important that we kind of defer to whatever is most likely to be true rather than looking for what makes us most comfortable, because that's kind of the response that we see a lot of people. They react with anger when something makes them uncomfortable, and then they refute information that makes them uncomfortable and double down on beliefs that they hold, regardless of their ability to substantiate that belief with any hard evidence. So yeah, like I that's why, like, for me, I'm never going to alter my opinion on something that actually has scientific merit based off of someone's anecdotal opinion, because I'm inherently distrustful of anecdotal opinions now, because so many of them have been proven completely wrong. And it's safer to go with an opinion that is more likely to reflect and change as new information comes out than it is to go off of an opinion that is rooted in like human ego and like how someone feels about something. So anyways, I'm going to save this on my YouTube and on my Instagram. So if you want to watch it from the beginning, you can. But I just think that this is a really important discussion, because this very mindset of like horses being out to get us and doing things to be deliberately naughty is the primary justification behind a lot of the cruelty that is projected onto horses. And I say this as someone who has experienced not only believing this type of mindset, but also enacting and said cruelty because I thought my horses were out to get me. It enables a lot of mistreatment, and it's not as harmless as people think it is. And until there's evidence and reason to believe that horses are out to get us and are trying to be deliberately deceptive and naughty, I don't think we have a reason to believe it. So we should go down the path of whatever, one, is the most proven mindset, and two, whatever the least harmful mindset is to horses, rather than projecting mindsets that are not proven whatsoever and also have the potential to cause lots of harm. So anyways, thank you everyone. Have a good day. See you later. And you can watch this on my YouTube as a saved video or on Instagram. Bye-bye.